So next, we are going to shift gears, but not really, to more of a technology-focused talk. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Omar Ahmad. He's the Director of Innovative Engineering in the Department of Neurology at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and also the Director and Chief Creative Engineer of the Kata Design Group in the Department of Neurology. He is responsible for Kata's creative output and all Kata personnel. His strategic vision focuses on four fundamental aspects. First, fostering the best entertainment content possible through artistic emotional mastery, scientific research, and creative technological innovation. Next, creating visceral user experiences based upon neuroscience and physics-based animations for engendering movements beneficial for motor recovery and brain repair. Next, overall vision for all Kata projects, bridging the gap between academia and commercial quality engineering. And finally, applying the creative output of Kata to medical therapeutics on the clinical floor and iterating through design with physicians and clinical staff. Dr. Ahmad is the inventor of a number of physics-based real-time technologies and algorithms to create visceral user experiences that engender specific movements for creating greater brain plasticity after brain injury. He's responsible for maintaining tangible product output for Kata so that it exceeds in both quality and innovation what would be expected from academic or commercial production in isolation. He received his BS, MSc, and PhD degrees in computer science from Johns Hopkins University, GWC Whiting School of Engineering. On a personal level, I've really enjoyed working with Dr. Ahmad as we together are transforming the clinical space of stroke care. He is, without fail, able to hear our clinical wishes, even though they may be disjointed at times, and help us to elevate patient care to bring each of these innovations to life in the most magical of ways. I'm really looking forward to your talk, and take it away, Omar.
Thanks, Mona. Thank you, Dale and John, for those wonderful talks. And just to add to that point, Mona, it's, I'll get into this a little bit later, but one of the founding principles of Kata when John and I started it 10 years ago was to, bring the best of academia, engineering, the world of art and production, and apply it to clinical needs for physicians for, building new therapies, building new restoration and recovery paradigms. So it's been wonderful working with so many wonderful people. Before I start, I just wanted to say thank you to SKSI and all the many people and institutions that have made SKSI possible. We do have an overall guiding principle that hopefully the interventions that we develop and as we show them efficacious over the years will have a global impact. I resonated a lot with the notion that we can lower costs for people and actually bring these out to many people around the world in consistent ways. And that's also one of the things that we're excited to do. The title of my talk is Pushing Neurological Care Further with Digital Medicine, the emerging field of digital therapeutics and the human equivalent of animal enrichment. It's not so much a science talk as it is a talk about the design and creative process to bring all the volumes of clinical scientific insights and turn them into tangible things that can push clinical care forward. And the emphasis here is, as you heard from Dale and John earlier, is this notion of enrichment. So what is this multi-dimensional, whether it's going to be cortical to pathway plasticity or some other definition of plasticity, how do we create this type of state or zone in the brain that causes this? There's a growing field of digital therapeutics that I'll talk about. And there's some really interesting things happening there and its relevance to what we're doing. So in neurology, we are seeing a small revolution where digital medicine can actually treat a range of conditions. The field is very much in its infancy and it's growing tremendously in the coming years. Something really interesting is happening is there's a bill right now in Congress that would allow for reimbursement for what's called, quote, prescription digital therapeutics. And it's very much an evolution and culmination of the last decade and a half or so of amazing research which is showing that essentially these experiential technologies, which I think are some form of human enrichment, can actually have generalizable and profound effects on the brain, and used potentially to treat a number of conditions, not just stroke. So spinal cord injury, degeneration, and we're doing some very good in the elderly. We're doing some very good clinical trials, which early pilot studies showed some strong evidence of. John and I started Kata to focus on neurological restoration, and it was really a meeting of very profound ideas that he had in science and medicine, with profound ideas that my colleague Permeet Roy and I had with animation and physics and experiences. And we kind of, when we met, we were very obsessed with creating incredible experiences that went beyond what happens in traditional video gaming. And John kind of looked at what we were doing and he said, well, what if you tied that to the motor output of a human, so you could kind of have this controllable, amazing experience. And that's kind of been the guiding principle of all of Kata's productions for the last over a decade now. So there's a lot of definitions right now out there about what is digital medicine. And there's a group, I think, that's called a consortium for digital therapeutics that has its own definition, but we've kind of stayed very focused on two things. And this is what Kata produces with digital medicine. And one is, it's a digital intervention that has a direct, measurable, positive change in outcome that pushes clinical care forward. So patients can feel and see the benefits. So your ARAD is doubling, or you're gaining more functionality. And this is something that we're really striving to do that goes beyond standard of care. And the second thing is, the outcome improvement cannot be achieved without the technology, or it is impractical to achieve without the technology. So this goes into the notion of global health. John showed some of the slides of the SMARTS-2 study, which showed efficacy in the subacute phase of stroke for patients. We achieved the same result with highly specialized therapists giving extra dosage and intensity, and one could argue characteristically different types of therapy after stroke. But why Dolphin, the one of the neuroanimation experience that we've used, I think still falls within digital medicine, is because it's a consistent and very practical way to scale out such an intervention. You're getting the same type of therapy. And I do think that we're going to show in the subsequent clinical trials, there's one going on in New Zealand, and there's a Department of Defense trial that we'll see efficacy move beyond what can be done without the technology. And these 2 points are to distinguish digital medicine from what are normal technological tools or information technology in medicine. And it leads to the kind of premise that human enrichment is really only possible with digital medicine. We kind of vaguely understand this idea. This mouse is in this environment that has lots of toys, it's colorful, it's social, but what are the active ingredients in there? And even if you were to build something like that, how could you do it in a way that's measurable and consistent, and you can tune and titrate? And I think it's obvious that digital technology and experiential technology are integral to that. Something like Walt Disney Imagineering meets clinical medicine and video games. So a few trends that are going on right now in digital therapeutics and medicine that are relevant. I think in the last 10 years, there's been major technological advancement. Major technology platforms, Samsung, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Meta, previously Facebook, they're integrating smart devices, tracking apps into electronic medical records for comprehensive pictures of a patient. This applies to us in the monitoring side of things, but I don't think the pure digital medicine is necessarily coming from that, unless it's a way that technology can help manage a condition better than what our traditional ways of managing the condition are. Technology to capture biological data is becoming very cheap and ubiquitous. In the next 5 years, you're going to see pose tracking cameras embedded in TVs. They're already actually embedded in your iPhones, and they're getting very, very good. I think within the next 5 years, you'll have millimeter level precision of pose, so all your joints, by just standing in front of any TV. And so the question is, what can we do with that data? In our case at Kata, we use that to generate an input, a signal into a very comprehensive neurorestoration experience that engenders the requisite, we believe, plasticity for recovery. But it can also help monitor and track patients to sort of track the recovery over time. Traditional technologies are becoming smart. So there's an interesting case for this first point here about digital therapeutics in medicine. There's two companies that come to mind, Propeller Health and Livongo. And what Propeller Health did was very intelligent. They took data and tracking and a smart inhaler for asthmatic patients. And they essentially took all this information about your whereabouts, your diet, the pollen count, what you do in a day, your exercise level, and how often you're using your inhaler. And then they were able to manage that digitally to optimize for lower inflammation. And it works. People who use this system, they have a direct measurable clinical outcome that's better than without the technology. And here, it's a great example of how a technology can manage care in a way that it's going to be too hard for someone outside of that. Livongo did this for glucose meters. So the same idea. And again, I think what's really important is the direct measurable outcome that can be felt by a patient that's accomplished by the technology that you can't do otherwise. Kata takes this a little bit further, and what we're really trying to do is use fundamental technology and engineering advances that provide new treatment tools that were impossible in the past. So it's not just management which leads to better outcomes, it's entirely new types of therapies and treatment which leads to better outcomes. So Kata was focused or is focused on neuromotor restorative treatments, and they follow a decade of work by my colleague and so many others in the field that we've kind of understood what's needed is restoration with the correct timing. So when you give it, the dosage, the intensity, and this very elusive concept called enrichment. And what is enrichment? And we've heard this many times today. What's the human equivalent of the mouse model of enrichment? So we think it has something to do with dexterity, and that's non-task specific movements that you're doing. When a mouse is playing with new toys in an enriched environment, what are they doing? When you move a ball around or you play with something new, you're kind of intuiting the dynamics of that object and that interaction, and you're exploring in a motor space things that you normally don't habitually do with a task. So it's kind of non-task specific, highly complex movement. It's continuous movement. So it's, you're not moving in sort of a gesture or a button or a habitual task. It's kind of, you're constantly moving and thinking and adjusting complex 3D pathways. So that's the kind of covers the complexity part of it. And then the last part is it's got to be compelling. And there's so many factors that go into this, social, artistic, music, what makes an experience enriching. And we kind of know it when we see it. A lot of very, very high production value has to go into something to creating the human equivalence of enrichment. Is it going to be, I don't think you could put a human in a room with a bunch of balls and colored walls, and it would do the same thing. So it has to be truly compelling. One of the things that my colleague John has constantly emphasized is we have to bring that level of Pixar or Walt Disney level production value and magic into creating compelling and enriching experiences. We have to elevate or we have to give them a transcendent experience, a transcendent emotional experience. When Pixar artists are designing characters, they spend hours and hours and hours on the tiniest detail to invoke a certain emotion. And we treat our restorative experiences in the same way. If we're trying to engender the emotion of hope or motivation, or make a patient feel like they're in the middle of a kind of sporting event with millions of spectators and they're kind of at the center stage, that's something we have to do. So again, what are the active ingredients? We know it's visual, motor, cognitive. It has all these aspects to it, and there's lots and lots of research that has been done to kind of isolate these active ingredients. I think for us, where we kind of hypothesize where neuromotor training, or where that sweet spot of human enrichment is between four things. And this is based upon a lot of studies and a lot of research by many scientists. One is, I think, kind of the most important thing is it's the input has to be physically diverse and dynamic. So we're trying to avoid task specificity with our movement and move in a very complex 3D environment as the input system. There's lots of research with video games and visual spatial challenges, which have 3D they have minimized input, but they then have extremely complex environments that you're navigating. And that's really the difference between what we do in a neuro restorative experiences versus a traditional video game, is the input system is very different. So we'll be navigating 3D worlds in very complex ways. We'll be navigating 3D characters in complex ways, but the input will also be 3D. So it's, how do you do that? You have to track someone in 3D. And we'll get into some other really important developments that Kata does with designing customized hardware for input, because as a patient is impaired, how do you extract the tiniest signal from them in order to generate complex 3D input? And there's some exciting things that we've been doing in that realm. So the visual spatial challenges, I alluded to that. So I think it's over quite a while, over a decade now, Daphne Bavillier did some pretty groundbreaking work, initially showing generalized transfer of skills from 3D action gaming. And there's lots of other subsequent studies which show the same sort of thing. So you have these complex 3D environments that you have to mentally navigate, and that seems to be beneficial. New and surprising physics. There's some pretty interesting research that actually came out of Johns Hopkins, which showed improvements in learning in infants when they were exposed to essentially novel physics. So when a system doesn't behave as they're used to, they explore the system and the dynamics of the system, and we think that's beneficial. This forms the basis of some pretty cool technology that Kata has developed and invented. We create synthetic animals. They have their own nervous systems. They have their own motor dynamics. They have their own little brains that issue flexion and extension commands. And then we tap into those by extracting signal from either a device or a tracker. And then you move and you explore and you learn the motor space of this new animal. So it's really learning the physics of the animal. So a dolphin will kind of behave differently when you turn it. It's reacting to hydrodynamic forces in the water. It's reacting to different types of speed. So we're very accurate in how we model these things in our simulations. So you're able to go in and you're able to just kind of feel and explore and babble in this world of new and surprising physics. And the final thing that we do in this human enrichment model is we make the experiences compelling and engaging. And there's so much more that, it's so multivariate. I'm not sure scientifically how feasible it is to try to identify these things in this type of way, but this is just, they're kind of general intuitive principles for us. there's a whole world of music, and we've kind of begun exploring using that in our neurorestoration experiences in a very profound way, where we actually tie in the movement of these animals to music generation itself. So as you're moving an animal, you're actually playing an instrument, a new instrument. And we do it with timing and what's called vertical and horizontal composition. So you're actually, doing it harmoniously. It actually sounds really good. You're changing the soundtracks as you do it. Okay, so I'm going to jump into kind of one of our flagship experiences that has, Bandit the Dolphin. We developed this digital therapeutic. It was really the first digital therapeutic to ever achieve efficacy in any neurological condition, subacute stroke. As John talked about, it was twice as effective as conventional therapy for stroke patients. In a study at the School of Public Health, Bandit increased the reaction time and grip strength in the healthy elderly. So just FYI, the initial results from SMARTS 2 are being studied in much more depth in New Zealand in kind of a phase 2 clinical trial. And the results by Dr. Michelle Carlson are being studied from a multi-million-dollar DoD grant for TBI and Alzheimer's. One quick note, I thought it was interesting in both SMARTS 2 and the healthy elderly study, there's no specific workout of the hand in the Bandit therapy. You're just moving your arm, it's upper arm. Yet we did see, the skilled recovery in the ARAT and also grip strength and reaction time. So it's a question about, how much skilled recovery these grasps can we do without task specificity, without, supplementing with it. And that's just an open question, but I think that it's not easily, I don't think we can just bifurcate it as being there's this kind of non-task specific enhanced recovery that has to go with task specificity, sorry. Bandit would go on to generate right now over $10 million in funds for 12 ongoing clinical trials. I think we're working with our external partners. I'll explain the financial disclosures at the end of the talk, to actually get more money to do more studies. Hopefully that number will be around 40 million total in the coming years. And then finally, led by Mona and Steve, Kata developed an inpatient experience room to bring Bandit to patients at the earliest phases of recovery and define novel clinical delivery systems. The picture on the right is Bandit being played in a room in 12 West on the Brew. It has colored lights, sound, integrated speakers, the projector, and this is kind of an attracker. So this is our notion of kind of human enrichment that's being done on the inpatient floor. We have other clinical settings and rooms being developed, both outpatient and inpatient. So it's really hard to describe the level of engagement, the level of enrichment that occurs with the dolphin. There's so much that has gone into it. There's so much art, there's so much technology, there's so much music design and sound effects, but it's best to show it. So I'm going to show a patient in Portugal and how she's playing with it, and you can kind of gauge for yourself the level of intensity and the level of enrichment that occurs with this. Favorite part of the video. And then I'm going to show this opening scene of our Bandit the Dolphin and some gameplay that shows how dynamic the gameplay can actually get with the patient moving. All right, so Bandit the dolphin was upper extremity, so it was your upper arm that we were tracking with a depth camera to extract 3D positions and then mapping that into the dynamics of the animal. But as John alluded to earlier, one of our passions now is hand recovery. So how do we take these principles of neurorestoration and apply them specifically to the hand in the recovery process? And one of the most stark observations I had when we would go out on wards with John and with the other clinicians is that a lot of these patients early in stroke were classified effectively as plegic. But if you were to hold their hand, which we were allowed to do, and to just have them push against our fingers, we could actually feel very, very tiny residual forces. And the hypothesis was, well, what if there's still a level of dexterity that's possible with these very, very tiny forces before their strength recovers? And shouldn't we be working that out in a critical time period? And that's what we aim to do. Initially, I remember we partnered with Apple when the 3D Touch first came out on their iPhone. And we would go around the wards just to see if the patient could hold that and make tiny micro movements on the screen. And we realized that that was completely infeasible because of the complexity of postural isolation. So they would be, the synergies and just the lack of structure for holding their hand in a certain position to generate a movement, wasn't there. So we sought to design a device that would measure the tiniest forces in the fingertip. And this is an ongoing project between Kata, the Bressler Design Group, and it's funded by our external partner, MindMaze, and N-Square Healthcare. And the device allows you to measure at the tips. So when you put your fingers into these little clamps, it can measure 5 degrees of freedom at the fingertip in the millinewton range. So we're talking about steps of like 5 millinewtons. So it's so tiny that you wouldn't be able to see the movement. And you can actually put your finger in it and then generate signal. So we've done some early tests with patients at Kata, and it's remarkable. One of the therapists was jumping up and down when they were able to see a patient move something forward and backwards where they had thought they had absolutely no residual movement in the hand. So the question becomes, if we can extract that level of dexterous signal that early, what could we do with it? Could we create this entire neurorestorative experience around that simple thing? So I'm going to show you a very cool video next. That's a hummingbird controlled by a device called the Hummingbird. It's a neuroanimation creature that I developed in my spare time. It's controlled by 5 degrees of freedom on one fingertip from this device. But this is what it looks like. So in some early tests, a patient was able to move him forward and backwards, flexion and extension of the fingertip, and it was entirely made possible by this device. So this is an extreme example of enrichment. I mean, I think it when they're immersed in the experience and you're controlling this animal, you kind of lose sight of what you're doing in the sense that it just moves. You're looking at it and you're in this device and you kind of lose that connection between what you're doing, and it becomes a very intuitive exploratory process. The bird in that example can be titrated. So you could be only using 1 degree of freedom, or you can use 5 degrees of freedom, or you can use 20 degrees of freedom on it. It's the nature of our neuroanimation creatures is that they have their own control frameworks, and you can kind of plug in at any point to them. And that's very useful for therapeutic protocols, because I call it a patient gradation model. This would be something at the tail end of your therapy. And I'm always surprised to see just how good patients get when it's always the case. We have to design more levels. We have to design more complexity into the experience at the tail end of their recovery process. They get so good at it. They get better than healthy people. And then, but you have to start very, very, very simple, moving it back and forth, and you have to learn that. And understanding that gradation is really fun because it's kind of like, well, if I can get from this step to this step to this step to this step, I can eventually get them here. And if they're playing as I showed that video, then they're probably doing pretty well. That gradation model is 100%. It's a 100% necessity to have clinical iteration with therapists, with clinicians, because they're the ones that are like, no, they're not going to do that yet. We have to do something much, 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 much simpler. And then it's taking our insights into where we want to go with the therapy. I think that becomes very useful. So that process between clinical iteration, between the engineers and the artists and the designers and the clinicians is super, super important. Okay, I'm going to go on to another project that we're doing. This is done by, it's led by David Gomez. These slides were borrowed from him. He sent them to me this last week. And we developed a device that is designed to engender complex manipulation in a different way by simply using all of your digits around a very small knob and twisting them. And this simple action has an incredible amount of interdigit cooperation. And we think that's going to be necessary. You can use for recovery and restoration. You can use both hands, multi-postural. It's very dynamic and very, very dexterous. It's not easy to actually do it, but most patients can do a little bit of it. So again, that titration is super important. The pictures on the bottom, we call it the twirl stone, are an example of this. I'm going to go ahead and it's best to just show it. So here is a neuroanimation creature that David developed. It's an axolotl that goes around an environment. This is a very early prototype of the game. We polish games as seriously as any professional game design studio in the world. And you're going to see some really great artwork by Boma Jack, who's the lead artist on this project. I'm going to show some screens a little later. This is and this is a more advanced version of the device that's wireless. So David developed this system which can be actually checked out right now. And we've got some really promising results with adherence and people taking this home. So playing 20, 30 hours of the game. No, sorry, 10, 20 hours of the game. The pillow on the right, David developed, it's an incredible postural isolation of the wrist. So it's extremely comfortable. You could put this on a bed. So the goal is actually we want to do this in the bed and connect it to one of our super rooms so that output would go onto the TV where they can just do this on their own. And you'll see the patient moving. Now it's steer left, that way, that way, yep.
Right, left. Okay. So there's going to be blocks that are coming
yep.
from the right side to the left side, okay?
Keep going down.
You're going to touch a block that you want to focus
All right,
on.
that's where we're going to get up here,
Right.
see them?
And
That's
you
where we
have
want to get.
focus, it'll change into a circle.
So now you
You're
know
gonna
this
focus
entire
on it
place.
all the
This is
way
like,
until it's about to leave the screen. You got to touch it before it leaves the screen, okay?
awesome. See this blue thing? We're going to get up here, see if we can do that. Yep.
Alright.
That's it.
Let's stand up.
That's it. Steer, 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 steer.
Alright,
Yep.
put your hand up
Yep,
there.
that's perfect. Steer, steer.
Yes, yes, yes,
Oh,
yes. That's
almost
beautiful.
got it.
Oh my god, that's beautiful.
And you heard a little bit of the work that David has done with Chris Kennedy at the Peabody Institute, where the music is actually being generated by that. The way the way this neuroanimation creature works is the basic undulation. So the movement is controlled by the undulation of the right twirl stone, and then the direction can be controlled by the left. But there's lots of really cool variations you can do. You can actually tie in both devices, left and right, equally to the same control. And you can also do steering and undulation on the same control. So this is a kind of a product of the way our physics animation is designed. You can't really do this with traditional gaming technologies. We've really pushed the boundaries on physics animation and physics control of animation, which came out of the necessity for patients. It's wireless too, which is really convenient. This is an example of production value. It's one of the scenes that we're continue to work on and evolve. This is by Boma, one of our artists at Kata, and it's absolutely beautiful. You know, we hold everyone to very, very, very high standards. I consider this to be a piece that could fit superbly in any very well-crafted Nintendo game. We think of, you know, the artistic process for us is serious. We, you know, do design and iteration and mood and tempo and colors, just like any professional production house. And that's absolutely necessary. It's difficult, and we're very thankful to SKSI for giving us the resources and opportunity to actually do this. You know, this is not something you can go to a typical grant and be like, we want to hire artists to do Nintendo quality artwork for patients. But I do believe it's absolutely necessary. And I also believe that patients deserve this. And that's really driven by John's insistence over the last decade that we need to give the highest quality to the patients. And it's something that we live and breathe and live and breathe. And this video is of Nono, but this is going to show more of this dynamic music that I was talking about. So these are, I love watching that video. These are two, the sound and music and animation are the two areas that we've pushed way beyond what even, multi-million-dollar gaming studios do today. People don't do this level of interactive music. We hypothesize it's necessary for recovery and restoration. It's hard to, the experience is very transcendent. You feel like you're composing and playing at the same time, but it's not subservient to the music. So a lot of interactive music in games is, there is a correlation between what you're doing and the musical events, but they're only triggered to some standard song or beat. This is different. It's changing the tempo and the beat and the music itself to your movements. So you're becoming the instrument. You're not enslaved to the instrument. And that's a key difference in what we're doing. It sounds incredible when you play it. I've never had an experience like this in games where you just get so immersed in the entire experience. It's really amazing. He's continuing the work in other forms, and I think all of our productions now in the future will have this interactive dynamic music component to it. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit towards the end of the talk and talk a little bit about a philosophical difference that we have at Kata. And I feel like sometimes we're going very, very much against a trend that when a lot of people think digital medicine or digital therapeutics, they think, taking a bunch of data and tracking a bunch of patients, and somehow that's going to create new medicine. And I think what the idea is that the observational power of automated artificial intelligence systems over huge, data sets will give insights for treatment that we couldn't see otherwise. I think there's lots of evidence where this fails. IBM Watson was a great example. I mean, it's, $5 billion down the drain, 10,000 people hired, not one useful result that came out of that. There's lots of examples of similar failures. There's certain, there's certain ways that it becomes interesting when you take, radiological image databases and you train them on gold standard and you look, we got 95%, but I think, the same or whatever. I think that what we're trying to do is take really deep, fundamental human insights, clinician insights, and use technology to bring those insights into a practical way for restoration in medicine. I don't personally believe that a bunch of data will ever replace that process of human insight and human creativity. And this is where we're very different in the landscape, is we want to be able to take those tools and use them to enhance and empower clinician and scientific ideas, and then put them through the rigors of clinical validation to get real outcomes and real measures. And I don't think we're satisfied unless we're moving clinical outcomes beyond standard of care, and that's where our heart and soul is kind of placed. In order to do all of this, Kata has to be a very radical cross-disciplinary team. We have engineers, artists, physicians, therapists, nurses, scientists, architects, interior designers, musicians. There's even more. I mean, we have electricians, people who do with wiring, colored lighting. This was very much an effort by John and myself early on. We kind of both saw this, the necessity for this type of team, and Justin has been so wonderful in allowing this to grow. And again, we're very, very grateful for SKSI to allow this to grow over the last 5 years and more. So Kata, what we also are is a very balanced mix of academia and industry. And the way I usually separate this is basic science itself needs the know-how and production expertise of industry. There's all sorts of tools and methodologies that are available to industry that academia can't really fund. It can't really do cheaply on a, on a grant with hiring a grad student to do these types of things. And then on the other side, industry really can't innovate without the constant creative ideas of academia. So industry is really good at methodological production. It's really good at solving a well-defined problem with great technology. So if you say, hey, go make an incredible game with an incredible experience, they can do that. There's lots of money, lots of tools, lots of technology. But to say, hey, this is an unsolved problem, we're not getting the type of recovery that we want, now go do that, it's very hard for them because they're market constrained and they can't. So we're trying to take the best of academia and the best of industry. And I mean that we actually, it is really a small industry group within the hospital. It's like a little Disney Imagineering and production house in the middle of a hospital. I will also say that on the, on the other side, one of my own impetuses for starting this was, during my PhD, I thought it was at the Center for Computer Integrated Surgical Systems and Technology at Johns Hopkins. There was an incredible effort and spirit to innovate, but everything always just got tied down to some small, thin academic question, which didn't push the overall technological tool forward. Because how much you can't really publish about. We're not going to publish about our artistic design. We're not going to publish about our music design. But we know that, but the bar to achieve something for clinical efficacy is just as high. It's just that the multi-dimensional components, you can't, turn each of those into a paper publishing path. It's not how this works. You need all those multi-dimensional components at an industrial level, and then the outcome we will take on the academic path and put the clinical rigor and the scientific rigor there. So it's a very, very complicated idea, and it's intensive and it's expensive, but we believe it's absolutely necessary to achieve good outcomes for patients. One final thing, the mission of Johns Hopkins by Daniel Gilman is to educate its students and cultivate their capacity for lifelong learning, and to foster independent and original research and to bring the benefits of discovery to the world. And I think the Department of Neurology, under its leadership and incredible faculty and staff, that embodies these principles, and it's also the principles of Kata. There's, the Oslerian principles of residency, which were the primacy of the patient, the importance of patient-based education, immersing oneself in patient care and bedside teaching is absolutely what we apply at Kata to engineers and artists who work alongside clinicians. They're embedded in the hospital. They have to absorb all of the nuances of a patient's journey, of clinicians, of what's going on, in order to develop the correct solutions. And just the disclosures at the end, M-Square Healthcare is licensing some of the work we did at Kata for the Dolphin and bringing it out into other clinical studies right now. And I think they are trying to commercialize it at some time in the future. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Omar. Thanks for showing us the thought process, the detail orientation, and the end products thus far with your beautiful prescribable tool. So I really appreciate this talk, and lots more to come about how these tools are embedded into the clinical space. I want to remind participants to please put their questions and comments into the chat or the Q&A box so that we can facilitate questions. If any of the panelists have questions or comments, please go ahead and unmute yourself or and show your video. You've already gotten some kudos in the question and answer box. Thank you, excellent, from Sita Ingram. So thank you for that. So I'm just going to ask the question out loud in front of all of our global friends here. So how do we really get these tools to patients? On one hand, as stroke neurologists and clinical teams, we're very detail oriented about the highest of quality, never want to compromise that. But on the other hand, we're very impatient in some ways to get some tools that we can prescribe to treat patients with this very disabling disease. So what is your opinion of how we can really get this pipeline greased and moving forward, which is the whole kind of goal of what we're doing together? So I just want to ask it out loud to hear your current thoughts on how we can keep this train moving forward at lightning speed for patients who need these tools.
Thank you. I mean, it's a great question. So I think a couple things. One, and this is, largely the effort of you and John, is that the adherence to dosage, the adherence to clinical protocol is separately just as challenging and just as important on this technology. So, I don't think you can just have this sitting at home and someone will come and use it, although, there might be some intermediary or some place that you could go to it. So I think the first step is you have to change the mentality on how much and what types of experiences or recovery or restoration paradigms are needed in certain windows. And there has to be accessibility within the hospital, within the inpatient floor, for this to happen. I think there's no other way. I think one compelling area is cost reduction. And I think that this is absolutely primed for that, can we take the same amount of rehab dollars and actually generate more therapy at a lower cost? I absolutely think that's possible. And I think that's possible because it's efficient and it's consistent. So I think that, getting this out there requires a kind of a paradigm shift in clinical deployment. And that's, of course, I think going to be strengthened with evidence. And we're continuing to do very strong clinical trials. And I think when more of that comes in, we'll have the basis to advocate